Welcome to the podcast. It's Whether or Not and to What Degree, and it's the fall edition. We're recording this actually right before fall gets started, but we wanted to kind of get in depth because this is something that folks around here absolutely love, is fall color.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it, Kendra. You know, like that first fall air mass we've had a couple already this year, but that first one we get, that first morning where it's a little crisp, has that little feel of fall to the air. We've had that a couple of times already.
And it's like I tell people, I'm like, don't get too excited about this because you know it's going to get muggy again. We'll probably end up with a tropical system that messes the whole thing up. But, you know, people just love to see that first little twinge of color up in the mountains. But first off, I thought we would start by talking about why the leaves change. Like, what is the process here? We're trying to kind of keep it fairly simple. And as you can imagine, really the first step is getting those cooler temperatures, less daylight, cooler temperatures at night. That really spurs along the process. And the reason for this, you know, it's daylight, the sunlight, that is the food for plants. And it creates chlorophyll. Well, the chlorophyll, when it gets less sunlight in the plant, breaks down. That's what causes the green color. So that's why the green begins to go away. And then you get the transition to the other colors like red and yellow that can be so brilliant when they're in that transition phase to, you know, eventually dying and falling off the tree.
And I think the plants and trees also sense the sun angle. The sun angle is getting lower in the sky, and then that creates the process that we just talked about. And a lot of it is really dependent on elevation, Kendra. You know, we really, you know, so here's the breakdown of the timeline. So the last week of September, which is going to be upon us very, very quickly.
Yeah, we're recording this podcast on September 15th.
I know, yeah.
So right now, not a whole lot happening,
not a whole lot.
Getting there.
Right, in a couple of weeks, we're talking about spotty color above 6,000 feet along the Blue Ridge Parkway. And then we move into the first week of October, and the colors transform above 5,000 feet around Mount Mitchell and Grandfather Mountain. And then the second week of October, between 4,000 and 5,000 feet, we've got vibrant colors, Mount Pisgah, Blue Ridge Parkway, Cashiers, and the Waynesville area as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of this is hinging on the weather. If we get a tropical system, right, with wind and rain, all bets are off, right?
Absolutely. That can really mess up the whole thing. But yeah, just from my memory, I always feel like right around mid-October is when people are really flocking up to Western North Carolina because you don't have to go to the extreme high elevations. You don't have to hike up to the top of Mount Mitchell to see that color. You're going to see it in places like Asheville or maybe just north of Asheville coming into that second, third week of October. But we have to wait a little longer for the lower elevations,
True.
Right?
And then the third week of October, the third week from 3,000 to 4,000 feet, best colors are in Little Switzerland, back through Brevard, Table Rock, Bryson City, and once again, Pisgah National Forest. And it'll be really interesting. I'm very curious to see what the colors will be like in those flood-ravaged areas.
Yeah.
From Fred.
Yeah.
You know, because if this is true with all the rain that they picked up there, that the colors would not be as vibrant.
Yeah, okay.
So we'll, you know, I guess it really depends. But then we also have a dry stretch now in a way, too.
Yeah, so that's where it gets really a little bit complicated. You know, we're doing a little research on this, and, you know, logically you'd think, you know, you get a little bit of rain, it'll make everything healthier. You're gonna have trees that are well, you know, watered. You're gonna have leaves that are healthy. You'd think that would be the right combination for the whole process to go well. You know, the best thing for fall color, we talked about it, is that, you know, it responds to sunlight. You know, obviously during the summer everything's so green because we get so much sun. If we have a bunch of cloudy days in a row, if we have a bunch of rain, that's going to affect how it all happens. So clear, sunny days are best, and then you want those clear, chilly nights.
Yes.
So if you've got, you know, cloudy conditions at night, rain, and you don't have a lot of contrast between the daytime and nighttime temperature, it's not going to trigger that reaction for color change as well. So what you really want is pretty weather, especially starting in September onward. It doesn't seem like what happens in the summer really affects it unless you've been in a severe drought. If you've been in a terrible drought, then chances are everything's going to be so unhealthy and so, you know, dead that nothing's going to look good. But essentially, rain diminishes the color. So what you want is the dry stretch that we've had recently. And that's what's interesting, Bob, and I really don't know the answer to the question, in that the intense rain we got from Fred, it happened 4 weeks ago, a month ago?
About a month ago, yeah.
So maybe that was long enough where things have dried out since.
Maybe.
And as this process is starting, it hasn't been that wet lately.
Thanks for joining us today. We are talking about an astronomical event, the Beaver Moon lunar eclipse, as we go into Friday morning. Right now, I'm joined by Maggie Connolly, and she is the planetarium expert specialist at the Roper Mountain Science Center. Maggie, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so we've got all kinds of astronomical events coming up. We've got the Leonids tonight into tomorrow, and we've got the lunar eclipse coming up Friday morning. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the lunar eclipse that's happening Friday morning is going to be a really great event. We get a lunar eclipse when the Earth is between the sun and the moon, and they're kind of in a direct line. Friday's eclipse is going to be a partial eclipse, so they're not quite in a straight line, but they're very close. But what's interesting about this one is that it's going to last a really long time. When the moon orbits around the Earth, it's in an ellipse. And so there are times where the moon's closer to the Earth, times where the moon is further away. So at this point, the moon is almost to its furthest spot away from the Earth, which makes it go kind of slow as well. So it's going to be a really long eclipse. It's about 3.5 hours long.
Good morning and welcome back to Whether or Not and to What Degree. I'm meteorologist Kylie Miller along with meteorologist Nicole Pape. We have a really interesting topic to dive into today. It's all about urban heat islands.
Yeah, urban heat islands impact areas with more concrete structures. Think of cities with their urban centers, that the things that the heat gets attracted to, gets absorbed into, and then it actually makes the air surrounding those structures hotter than some of the less urban areas nearby. We want to bring in an expert today. We have Dr. Jeremy Hoffman here with us. He is the David and Jane Cohn scientist at the Science Museum of Virginia. Thank you, Dr. Hoffman, for joining us today.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we want to talk to you a lot about urban heat islands. You were noted on a climate website that we had looked at, Kylie and I, just delving into this topic a little bit more. So we want to kind of start with the things that can come, the dangers that can come for cities, people that live in cities with these urban heat islands.
Sure. So, I mean, first and foremost, urban heat islands are harmful to our health. They basically turn up the thermostat on already uncomfortable and sometimes dangerous heat waves. And we know from research that in some neighborhoods, particularly those without extensive amounts of trees, without access to parks, or neighborhoods without buildings tall enough to create shade, this can really mean dangerous conditions for people, especially those elderly individuals and anyone with an underlying health condition like asthma and COPD. And what's really interesting is there are some studies that are coming out now showing that there's even higher rates of preterm birth occurring in these more built-out areas of cities. And we also know from our own research that these effects are disproportionately borne out by communities that tend to be located in these hotter areas, which consistently are communities of color and those without means, like lower income and higher poverty neighborhoods. So that's really just one aspect of it. You know, it impacts on our health, but there are many others that we can talk about too.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. It poses a threat to health, and when it gets so hot, we have to really crank up our ACs. That's not the best for the environment.
Yeah, as that's a really good point. As we, these particular areas of cities need to use more energy to cool themselves down if they even have, air conditioning to begin with. That is a feedback loop in that as we use more energy, then we're actually putting more, carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, especially if we're not using a clean source of energy. And that continues to warm the background climate and can even further emit more heat back into the urban area itself. So it's really sometimes a catch-22 about, what should we do in order to achieve more, adaptive capacity or the ability to thrive in these hotter areas of cities.
Let's talk about these shade canopies and the benefits that they can have and other things cities can do to increase their ability to cool.
Yeah, so it might be surprising, but we see in our own research that actually using higher height buildings in particular areas along, say, east-western corridor streets can actually cast shadows on pedestrian areas and places where people might be using public transportation. By improving the thermal quality of our cities, we actually improve a lot of other things all at once. So that's what's really hopeful and really great about using this kind of science to improve our cities into the future.
No, we really hope that city planners here, because this city is expanding so fast, can listen to this and hear a lot more about it and take a lot of that into consideration.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.